I'm Luke Chao. I'm founder of the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis in Toronto, Canada.
What inspired you to get into the mental health and helping field?
Well, I'll try to give you the medium length version of the story. As a kid, I moved around a lot and not by my own volition. And it kind of meant I had to rely on myself to, to feel a sense of stability, to kind of feel like someone is going to be around to take care of me. My parents were there, but they were both working. I had a twin sister, and she kind of went through the same thing that I did, but being my age, obviously we couldn't really take care of each other. So that was my upbringing. By the time I was old enough to walk to the public library, I started spending a lot of time reading and reading about meditation, reading about psychology, reading about philosophy, reading about how other people find happiness in the world, how other people make sense of the world. And that led to my degree being in English literature. So famously, English graduates don't have any clear-cut career paths afterward. So I kind of looked at my options post-graduation. And because I was interested in hypnosis due to many of my readings when I was in my teens, I decided, well, other people are doing hypnosis in Toronto, so why don't I also, get certified? So I got certified the summer after university. And I kind of sat on that certification for 2 years. What happened 2 years later was I took a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And I kind of came back having introspected, having made peace with many of my feelings, and as close to fearless as I'd ever been in my life. 2 weeks after I returned, I rented out my starter office, which I occupied for 16 years. Right now, I'm sitting in my forever office, but I came back, I rented out that office. I still wasn't sure whether I could make hypnotherapy into a profession, into a career. So I set up one of the rooms in that office suite with a big comfy chair, which I still have in this office, and I set up the other room as a photo studio. So I figure people are either going to pay me to take their portrait or to photograph their babies and their pets, or they're going to pay me to hypnotize them, and I'll let the market decide. Well, I made $0 as a photographer, and over again, people seem to prefer for me to hypnotize them. So no one can really just choose to be a hypnotist and then dictate to their clients that they must become clients. You kind of have to earn every client. And given hypnotherapy's reputation for rapid change, I'm losing my clients after 3 to 5 visits. So there's going to be an ongoing process of gaining new clients. So I credit my earliest clients for believing in this 23-year-old in this little office space, because they are responsible for me still doing hypnotherapy after all these years. No matter how much one toots their own horn, unless they have clients who agree, they don't have any occupation. So that's the medium length story.
Yeah, when people become your clients for the first time, do you see their confidence level rise as they go through the process?
Well, yeah. So visibly, one thing I kind of joke about is that this office is kind of like a factory for happier, more relaxed people, where very consistently people walk in, it's downtown Toronto, they're going to have some level of stress. And after about an hour of listening to a lower stress worldview, to a more empowered worldview, after listening really to how a self-loving, self-respecting person might think, some of that message gets absorbed. And I'll see them sit up straighter visibly as I speak to them. So until someone tells my client that you're an equal to every man and woman in this world, sometimes they don't feel it. But once someone tells them in adulthood, you're a level peer with your parents, with your teachers, with your coworkers, you see them sit up straighter. So yes, I visibly see people become more confident by the time they walk out.
So can you tell me about your methods?
Yeah. So a hypnotist is kind of someone you can hire to influence your thinking in a specific way that you've consented to, or indeed that you're paying them to. So most of us are influenced by factors that are not in our control. We don't choose our parents. Like, I didn't choose to lose all my friends every few years, every time they had to move. So most of us have this accumulation of influences that we never chose and never would have chosen if we were given a choice. So we don't choose our worst teachers. We don't choose friends who betray us. A hypnotist is someone you can hire to influence the way you think intentionally. And, earlier in my career, I kind of, because I was earlier in the career, I kind of saw hypnotherapy as almost like a lesser version or an unlicensed version of psychotherapy. And I come to define the profession much more clearly since, where it stands on its own as a profession that explicitly will tell their clients how to think ideally. And people are not getting this from their psychotherapists. They aren't getting it from their psychiatrists. Obviously, if you ask your therapist, what would you do? What would you do in this situation? You'll get an answer, but generally psychotherapists aren't dominating the entire session with their views of how to live a happy life or their views of how to be peaceful. So hypnotherapy does this rather unique thing of offering clear, specific guidance for how to be relaxed and how to be self-loving. I'm really just kind of articulating many of the thoughts from my own mind and my own life experience that kind of work for me in the moments when I am more relaxed or when I am more self-loving or when I am more self-accepting. Because as I mentioned, I have a bit of a trauma history. I'd been in the places where many of my clients are in. And since then, I'd also started a business and I'd, grown the business and I've had a few thousand clients at this point. So the one of the positive effects of losing your clients after 3 to 5 visits and then having to get new clients is that in less than 2 decades, I have had thousands and thousands of cases. The average psychotherapist can't really claim that if they're seeing their clients every week for a year or for a few years. They're just going to have a smaller total number of cases. But this larger sample size allows me to kind of generalize across class and gender and race and wealth lines what us human beings seem to be missing and what us human beings need to hear since we're not getting it from teachers and parents and media, right? So if only in school or at home or on the television, someone's teaching us how to be self-loving, not just that we should be self-loving. We get plenty of messages we should be self-loving, but when you kind of ask, well, how? What am I to do? How am I to think? Often, you realize it's often like the blind leading the blind. So in a world where we're not getting clear guidance for how to think like a self-loving person, well, that's where being able to just hire someone to teach you the thoughts of a self-loving person fills a rather unique niche in the mental health landscape.
Yeah, I live with bipolar disorder too, and it took me a while to have the right methods for me, and everyone's different. So, how important is it for people to be open with different methods?
Yeah, well, obviously, if someone's only going to call a hypnosis office, if at least to some degree that they're open to engaging in hypnosis. So let me
Right.
define hypnosis a little bit more clearly.
Yeah.
So, on top of me just kind of verbalizing the worldview of a relaxed, confident, self assured, self loving person, I am asking them to suspend disbelief. I am asking them to suspend their usual analytical modes of thinking. So, for example, let's say I'm helping someone to become more self loving. One point I'll make to them is that, well, you're a human being. And if all human beings get your love by default, then, well, it's just unhypocritical for you also to get your love by default. Now, if I say that to someone when they're fully cognizant, the inner critic very often pops up to reject that idea, though it's a perfectly good idea. So, like when your listeners or you are just kind of hearing me talk about the idea, you're entertaining the idea intellectually, but you might not be feeling it. So, the state of hypnosis can be defined as a state of mind where disbelief has been suspended. So by analogy, it's kind of like when you're a kid listening to a storyteller, or you're letting a movie impact you emotionally. So my clients do have to put themselves in this more vulnerable state where they've suspended their critical thinking, they've suspended their disbelief and their skepticism, and they kind of do have to trust that whatever I'm about to communicate is going to help them, and that is even better than the thoughts that they had before. So that trust absolutely has to be there. I realized over my career that the more information that I share upfront and even for free with new clients or before someone even calls my office, the more prepared they are to listen when they're in my office. So the messaging could be exactly the same, right? But if the person's listening and they don't quite believe that I can help them, then they're not feeling so much as intellectualizing my message. If they're instead there because, like, let's say they like what I have to say on YouTube, or they like my podcast or your podcast, they're much more willing to listen to what I have to say because I've already established that I say reasonable, helpful, and relevant things. So, yeah, to make a long answer short, the person does have to show up prepared, but at least I'll do my part to help them, arrive at a point of preparedness by the time they're in the big hypnosis chair.
I like that you just touched on your podcast. I was going to ask about that. Can you tell me about that?
Sure, sure. Well, okay. So earlier I talked about how, after thousands of cases where, I can't say it's only people of this gender or this race or this socioeconomic class. It's like everyone needs to hear this,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
I decided to launch a podcast called How to Be an Adult. Because what I've realized is that, most of us turn 18 and there's no fanfare and no one gives us like a trail guide to life.
Right.
So no one says, here's what it means to be an adult. Here's what you got to do. And now it's no longer your parents who have a duty to care for you. Now it is you who has a duty to care for you. So one point I often make to my clients is that in adult life, we never have to feel like a child who doesn't have a guardian. We actually get to feel every day, constantly, if we fully account for the stage of life that we're in, we get to feel like we have the constant guardian who's ourselves, right? So I wish we lived in a world where we could already turn on the TV, or someone can already attend an elementary school and they're hearing, well, by the time you're 18, by the time you finish high school, you're going to care for you. You're going to make sure that you're well fed, you're well rested, that you're saying no to people who have to be said no to. I wish we heard all of this because then I would have, more free time and I wouldn't have needed to launch this. I wouldn't have felt the need to launch this podcast called How to Be an Adult. But I do my best to fulfill the promise that's in the title, which is to give clear, specific guidance for how to be an adult. And it really is the same ideas that my clients kind of pay me for to instill during hypnosis. These ideas, in fact, come from my conversations with all of my private clients. But, the hypnosis bit just kind of makes it easier to accept these ideas. The ideas are still the same, whether or not you're just, whether or not you're using hypnosis to believe in them.
What can people do to love themselves?
Yeah, so let me kind of break down
Yeah.
self-love for your listeners, to answer the how question. So often, the thing that inhibits us from loving ourselves is a kind of zero-sum view of love, where we believe if we love ourselves, it means we're loving others less. Well, let me offer to you a positive sum view of love. Because, well, as an adult, you've got the adult human heart, right? You're not like a needy child. You've got an adult human heart. So let's say that dogs are right about us, that we are actually sources of love and warmth, and it's not just them who are sources of love and warmth. Well, if your own heart generates love, then you can bask in your own warmth the same way that the dog wagging his tail is not just wagging his tail for us, the dog's also a happy animal, right? So, so to overcome this impediment where people feel like love is zero sum, or that you have to divide love, that you have to divide a small pie, I want to instill this idea that love is a positive sum game, that you can love yourself and you still have plenty of it for your friends and for your family and for your neighbors and for any animals in your life and for nature and music and everything else you love. And then if you gave all your love away in this moment, in the next moment, your heart will replenish. So that's the claim I make. And you can put it to the test. Your listeners can kind of put it to the test, whether love is this scarce thing that has to be hoarded and divvied up, or whether your heart just makes more of it when you're remembering to use your heart. So that's one constituent part of a self-loving worldview, at least as far as I've been able to determine in 2025. Another part of it is that sometimes we kind of make this category error of misclassifying ourselves as like things as opposed to life. Now, the rules are very different. So I'll use this analogy. Let's say that I've bought a new iPhone. Well, the iPhone had better work, right? The iPhone had better come out of the box without a scratch. The iPhone had better do what it's advertised or it's worthless, right? Because things, objects, commercial goods have no intrinsic value. And when they don't work, they're discarded and they're worthless. Right? So we often treat ourselves like things. But we don't treat like if we have a heart, we don't treat our cats and dogs and houseplants like this.
Right.
If a dog gets old and can't play like a puppy can, if we're acknowledging that that's a living animal, right, then we still love the animal independently of the animal's ability to play. Or we'll still feed the cat independently of the cat bringing us mice. So if we kind of treat ourselves more like the animal, more like the houseplant, more like a child, more like a friend, more like a neighbor, because categorically that's where we are. Well, then loving and every form that love takes, like forgiveness and acceptance and compassion, it's the path of less resistance, right? So yeah, that's another constituent part of what I claim to be a self-loving worldview, where you got to categorize yourself as life, so that the loving flows much more freely than if you miscategorize yourself as a thing that must produce economic value to society. Let me see if I can articulate any other salient points or constituent parts of a self-loving worldview. Well, part of it is also going to be disagreeing with some dissenting views. If you try to account for every opinion of you, such as, the inner critic, which is an internalized voice of the harshest people you've met. Or if you kind of care what the bullies think, if you care too much what your boss thinks, if you care too much what a neighbor you have a spat with thinks of you, it makes it much harder to love yourself. So let's kind of weigh most heavily those who know you best. And those who know you best are not going to see you through like the commercial lens that a boss or like a customer or a client sees you through. So let's kind of like take the work stuff and put it aside. Let's kind of count friends, family, animals, neighbors who always wave and smile when you walk past. So if we kind of elevate how our friends see us, because they don't have to spend time with us. Like no one's paying them to be in the same room as us, but they're going to visit anyways. Let's elevate what our friends think of us. Let's elevate what our family thinks, at least the closer members of our family. And if we have any cats or dogs, well, they've seen us at our worst. Let's elevate what they have to say. Then it's easier to side with those friends, to side with that family, to side with the animals. And thereby to also side against, a boss who just cares you hit your KPIs, and you might side against the jerk of a neighbor who only says things to get under your skin. So being selective about the opinions you'll care about, I would say that's another constituent part of a self-loving worldview. So I'm confident making these points for all of your listeners. If I were speaking to an individual, I would probably give more specific details, but that I think is a pretty good starting point for a self-loving worldview. And until someone articulates it, we don't always arrive at these conclusions on our own, right? So one gap in the mental health landscape that is glaringly obvious to me is that many people they're almost like begging their therapists just to tell them how to think, how should they feel. And then it's not the profession of psychotherapy to actually tell them, right? They're supposed to kind of help the client, facilitate the client arriving at their own conclusions. But that's also why there's sort of this niche for hypnotherapy. And for better or for worse, that's also why a hypnotherapist can make their points after, usually for my clients, it's 3 to 5 visits. And then, once I've made my points, it is unnecessarily redundant to bring the client back to hear the same thing. So like the few points I outlined earlier, maybe the first time someone hears it, you kind of entertain the idea, you're still kind of seeing if I say sensible things. Well, the second time you're hearing me say things of that nature, you'll have actually lived real life with some of these ideas in your mind to see if I'm, pulling your leg or to see if I've actually got credibility. And then once you see for yourself that people still respect you when you say no, or people respect you better when you say no, well, then you don't just have to believe me. Real life teaches you the rest. So, one thing that I think kind of keeps hypnotherapy as a smaller profession is that if we do a really good job, our clients are done very quickly. I mean, if I'm seeing 5 clients in a day, I'm losing 1 or 2 clients a day. And we have to onboard 1 or 2 clients a day just to make up for the shortfall. But that's been my entire career. I hope that answers that question.
How does it feel for you to be helping others?
Well, it feels good. It's not just helping others in a way that's been like commodified,
Right.
or in a way that I believe could easily be replaced by a new graduate or even easily replaced by artificial intelligence. It's helping people in a way that I've kind of like honed over 18 and a half years of being obsessed with how does a happy person think. In fact, if you include my teenage excursions to the public library, it's been probably 30 years I've been thinking about how is a happy person even to live.
Yeah.
And I've kind of like been on both sides. So I get it when people are struggling, but I see them as Well, if their therapist and their doctor and their parents and their teachers never even gave them the constituent parts for how a self-loving worldview is constructed, well, let's start there. Let's remedy that gap before we assume that they're disordered, before we can jump to any conclusion that they're, quote, broken, as we often feel. So it's kind of it's an educational paradigm that I follow. So paradigmatically, I'll kind of describe it like this. The dominant mental health paradigm kind of assumes that we're born whole and healthy and complete. And therefore, if we're in distress today, there must have been some kind of trauma or some kind of medical issue that happened between the wholeness of our birth and the distress we feel as adults, right? That's kind of the dominant paradigm. It's a paradigm of we have to look at what's broken, right? I'm going to offer a very different paradigm, and this is the one I follow. We're born knowing nothing whatsoever. We are born not knowing how to take care of ourselves. We are born not knowing how to stand up for ourselves. We are born not knowing anything about anything. So if, as an adult, we still don't know how to take care of ourselves, if we still don't know, we can say no to someone else and still be a good person. Like, let's say Rosa Parks did. Someone's got to teach you, and then you do know. And once you do know, you're kind of like those people who heard this kind of thing as a child. So the things we didn't learn in childhood, we can learn in adulthood. The hypnosis bit makes it easier for the person to sit and listen and to absorb the messaging. With the suspension of disbelief, we've suspended the inner critic. We've suspended the thoughts that might reject everything I'm saying. But the essence of what I'm doing with my clients is I am clearly, straightforwardly giving guidance for how to think like someone who doesn't have their problem. And I'm not even looking for brokenness. They're going to tell me where they're distressed. They're going to tell me where it hurts. And I'll understand that. But I am treating my client as someone who had not previously received enough guidance or good enough guidance for how to be happiest under the circumstances that they're in. So I'm going to start by giving them that very clear guidance, and the hypnosis bit makes it easier for them to listen. And that's the weird thing I do. But to answer the question you asked, I feel really good about this. I work 6 or 7 days a week. So in a few weeks, I'm going to start teaching a certification class to teach other people to do what I'm doing. So that's my 7th day. I see clients Monday to Saturdays. It's not for the money. If I wanted to make as much money as possible, I would just join the corporate world or something.
Right.
It's because I actually see a huge gap between what people need and what I can provide versus where mental health is at right now.
Yeah, what you were saying with the inner critic, creates so many roadblocks.
Oh, so let me speak a little bit more about the inner critic.
Yes.
So often we kind of overvalue cynicism and negativity and pessimism, right? No one ever gets a PhD by just agreeing with what everyone else has discovered. We kind of have to disagree with something. So often, we kind of value the voice of criticism, the voice of negativity. We value not what is, but what could be, might be, should be. In other words, what isn't. But if you've ever trained a dog before, or if you've ever raised a child before, you can't even train a dog. You definitely can't raise a child by giving them only a long list of things not to do. You've got to give them one thing to do. And then they're doing that one thing and not doing the million other things you want them not to do, right? So if you don't want the dog to chew on the slippers or to chew on the furniture or to chew on the everything, you give them a chew toy and you train them to chew the one single chew toy, and then they're not chewing on everything else. So the inner critic, it's kind of like that nag saying, don't do this million, the item list of things. The other thing about the inner critic is it kind of distracts you with counterfactuals. So, why are you not like this? Why can't you, do this? Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like this person on Instagram or LinkedIn? And well, there's never happiness to be found in comparisons with people who are not you, and also in these counterfactual scenarios. So we hear a lot about gratitude, right? Gratitude is when you forcibly tear your eyes away from the counterfactuals, and you forcibly take a clear, hard look at matters of fact that are empowering, inspiring, beautiful, loving, kind, or anything else you deem having merit. Often, pessimists think that optimists are naive or foolish, but, well, when you look at the glass as half full, only then are you looking at the actionable substance that's contained in the glass. I mean, if we look at the glass as half empty, we have to get distracted by counterfactuals because there's nothing there to actually be seen. But if we look at the glass as half full, we know we can water a plant, we can give it to the dog, we can hydrate ourselves. If we only see the glass as half empty, we can't act on it. We don't know we can water the plant with the glass if it's half empty. We don't know we can give it to a friend if it's half empty. So I do see the inner critic as a great distractor. So I kind of have my clients imagine this box with the label devil's advocate, do not trust, not your conscience, not a truth teller. And I have them stuff their inner critic in that box and keep it muffled. And what I want them to kind of pay attention to are their approving thoughts. And it's kind of counterintuitive for someone who'd been under the thumb of their inner critic for all these years. But the same voice of approval that comes out of your mouth if you're teaching a kid how to ride a bike, right? That's the voice of approval that you want to use for yourself if you're doing the adult equivalent of learning how to ride a bike. You can't learn how to do anything new with only criticizing and fault finding. You've got to kind of, look at the proper way to do it and keep yourself on that track. And then when you do it, you approve of you doing that thing. So, again, until someone articulates all of this, sometimes the pessimist thinks they're more sophisticated to, stay a pessimist, and they don't want to be like one of those naive optimists. But when they hire someone to give them this kind of guidance, my words kind of put the professional seal of approval on their self-approving thoughts and their self-accepting thoughts and their self-loving thoughts. So, there are kind of two sides to this. One is to kind of box away the inner critic because your psyche doesn't need a fault finder. Just like, if you're trying to get something done at work, you don't need a fault finder. And the other part of it is what's going to fill in the gap. The thoughts that are worthier of nurturance are the thoughts that can appreciate the thing you're doing. So even like movie criticism shouldn't come from someone who's only just fault finding. They have to actually appreciate the art form of cinema. If they can appreciate cinema, and then from that place of appreciating cinema, they find fault with the film. Okay, fine. That's an informed view, right? But if someone just hates all art films, you'd be right to stuff the opinions in a box and just take it to be meritless. So your own thoughts about you that have no appreciation for you, you just stuff them in a box. It's going to be your thoughts that can appreciate you. I mean, those thoughts can still tell you hey, next time, let's try a different way, right? You can still self-correct. You can still be on a lifelong journey of growth without ever being verbally abusive toward yourself.
What do you do to help your own mental health?
It's a good question because so it used to be that I would experience hypnosis like every day, usually through recordings, but still. And now I kind of feel like I get the most from reading, well, going back to my roots, I guess. I get the most from reading books about philosophy, reading books about psychology, reading books about ideally how to think. So I love like these big idea books. And yeah, so I try to keep my mind stimulated and informed. I like to have many, many, many ideas to pick from, to then curate ideas that I think are worth having for myself and then sharing with my clients. So I've never lost. So one of my clients recently complimented me. He said that it's rare to find a professional you could feel like you could just like have a beer with, and my response to that was, I've never forgotten I'm a human being. I'm human first, and then I'm like occupation second or third or fifth or whatever. But I've never forgotten I'm human first. That's the thing that permits me to kind of speak across, you know, the divisions that we often see in others. So, gender lines, race lines, wealth lines, socioeconomic class. I kind of look beyond what I see as secondary or tertiary factors, because the primary factor is I'm a human being, they're a human being. What applies to me very plausibly applies to them. So, I used the word unhypocritical earlier in the context of loving yourself like you love other people. Well, I like to feel totally unhypocritical in that I only advise my clients with ideas that I truly believe in for myself as well. And I found that that's a pretty good filter. In other words, I take my own medicine. I'm not sure if that answers the question, which I may have lost sight of.
No, it is a good point of, you know, having someone with lived experience or relatability goes a way longer way.
Well, I mean, like, if you're going to climb Mount Everest, why would you hire the Sherpa who hasn't climbed the mountain and just radios up instructions from base camp?
Right.
Right? You kind of want the guy who's been up and down the mountain 100 times. So, when I go through troubles in my personal life, let's say there's a relationship that's on the rocks, a lot of that is kind of like the raw material for how in the future I might end up advising my clients who are going through a similar situation. So, in my personal life, I try to figure out, okay, well, what are the best practices for this situation? What am I going to do that 10 years later I'm not going to regret? What can I say that, on my deathbed, I don't have to repent for, right? So I kind of try to think things through in my personal life. And, if I've seen it work for me, then plausibly I can say it to a client. And then if the client reports that that view helps them, then I can say it to other clients. So I think that the question was like, how do I take care of myself?
Yeah.
So, to kind of expand upon this idea that I take my own medicine, I sleep on a very comfortable mattress because my clients need me to show up very well rested. I like eating good food, so I eat at the same caliber of restaurants that many of my clients will eat at. I don't think that, someone who works in healthcare or something that's healthcare adjacent, at least, has to take a vow of poverty. I think I'm more relatable to my clients if, I'm able to kind of take care of myself. So that way they get a well-rested, well-fed, well-remunerated hypnotherapist.
What would you say to anyone going through a tough time?
I guess it depends on the nature of what that tough time is. So, I mean, the toughest cases that I can think of are my clients who have been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And the prognosis is often just a few months. And one thing that I tell them is, well, you're not dead yet. And that's a matter of fact. You can still enjoy music. You can still feel love. You can still be loved by others. I mean, at some point, we all face the inevitable, right? I'm going to face the inevitable one day. But that day's not today. You know, so people kind of hire me to be like a philosopher to them in a way, to kind of think on their behalf and to communicate that thinking to them. So it really depends on the nature of what kind of tough time they're going through. But I feel quite confident saying that if someone with terminal cancer can be encouraged to live every day more with more gratitude, with more happiness, with more peace, then your tough time is one where there is a way to see it or to think about it that may cause less suffering than the way you're presently thinking about your circumstances.
Where do you want to see your mission, say, in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, the longer I practice, the more I've been doing one-to-many work. So I started one-on-one, and as I mentioned, I'm working 6 or 7 days a week. In that way, I do need to take better care of myself. And given that I don't really see the other mental health professions picking up the slack and giving very clear, specific guidance, well, it has to be that I'm speaking to more than one person at a time. So a couple of years ago, so I mentioned I'm in my forever office. I moved out of my starter office. So I could have been happy in my starter office forever, but one, the building was sold to a developer, and two, when I saw this new space, the reason I wanted to move in, it's not for like the brick walls or anything. I have a 650 square foot classroom set up over there so that I can do group hypnosis with up to 25 people at a time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So as far as I know, it's the only venue on the planet that's set up for group hypnosis like that. So, it's isolated. We've got sound treatments on the walls. We've got a nice sound system. We have nice, plush, comfy chairs. So last year, I also made those group classes more financially accessible by offering flat rate pricing. And also, I'm live streaming those group sessions as well. Last year, I also acquired a hypnosis app that I had originally contributed to as one of the voices, as one of the hypnotists, but then I just kind of like took over the entire app from its founder. So, and then of course I have my YouTube channel and the podcast called How to Be an Adult. So all of this doesn't make a lot of money. The money is actually
I'm with you there.
the money's actually in the private sessions. It's actually people want to pay for my private time and attention. So I'm going to keep doing that. But the private sessions kind of like subsidize the app and the YouTube channel and the podcast and all of that. So yeah, where I see things going over the next 3 to 5 years is out of necessity. I'm going to have to do fewer sessions one-on-one, and I'm going to be doing more sessions one-to-many, whether in a pre-recorded format or whether live or live streamed.
How can people reach out to you and learn more?
So I'll just give pointers to the resources I just mentioned.
Yeah.
So for private sessions, they can go to morpheusclinic.com and they can reach out for a free consultation with a staff member and a written treatment plan. For group sessions, they can go to the same website, morpheusclinic.com, and click on events or click on memberships. And for the app, Hypnu, you can go to the App Store or the Play Store and type in Hypnu, Hypnu. For the podcast, How to Be an Adult, they can search Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. So I think that covers every resource that I previously mentioned.